Thank you to Dyad for sponsoring this video. In this video, we bring on the founder of Dyad, who is an AI development expert, to teach you about three topics that I don't think gets discussed enough, but are incredibly important when it comes to vibe coding. The first is how to use open source models to save money when vibe coding. A lot of people are leaving a lot of money on the table, and this video is going to explain exactly how to avoid that mistake. We're going to talk about the different options for hosting your vibe-coded apps and how to save money when hosting, especially when you're just building simple projects. And finally, we're going to get into vibe coding security. And at the end of the video, Will is going to explain when it makes sense to use his own tool Dyad versus when it makes sense to use tools like Claude Code or Codex or other AI vibe coding tools. Everything in this video is going to be useful whether you're using Dyad or any AI vibe coding tool, so I'm excited to get into it.
Thanks, Seth. Really appreciate it. And yeah, it's great to catch up again. And I think this topic you brought about, like, you know, the the cost, right? It's like, what is the value you're getting from vibe coding? And like, we know that people can spend a lot of money on vibe coding, especially using the latest models from Anthropic, the Claude models, or from OpenAI, the latest GPT models. And it can be really expensive. It can really add up. And I think what's really exciting about this is that we're seeing a couple of things happen right now. We're seeing a whole bunch of these new open weight models, especially from the Chinese labs like Kimi K3, the DeepSeek models. They're making a lot of waves. And when you look at some of their scores and how they're performing, it's actually really impressive. They're really getting really close with the leading US frontier models. And then the other thing that we see is that because of those open weight models, you see that pressure of the pricing is actually making models, especially OpenAI, become really competitive. So if it's okay, I'm going to just share my screen and show a couple benchmarks. This is what I do when I think about like which models to use, about the different defaults, and it kind of walk you through it. And again, as you mentioned, right, like this is just applicable. Like you don't have to be using Dyad. You can use any sort of like vibe coding tool, open source tool like OpenCode, whatnot, anything that lets you pick your model, you're going to be able to take advantage of the insights here. So the first benchmark I want to share is from Cursor. They call this thing called Cursor Bench. And probably a lot of you guys have heard about Cursor, but it's basically an AI first code editor. And what they did was basically they took those real world user chat sessions, right? And they kind of figured out how well do the different models stack up on this. And what's really nice about this benchmark is that it's actually pretty realistic, right? It's like the kind of conversations, the tasks are really brief. And what they've done here is pretty interesting. So on the y-axis, right, this is vertical axis, you'll basically see the score. So of course, higher is better. Uh, and then on the x-axis, you can see left to right is basically the cost. So on the right side is basically $0. Top side, you get the highest score. And what you want to be is basically in the top right. So maybe not surprisingly, the top right is sort of like what they call it, like, the Pareto frontier. The Pareto curve is a Grok 4.5, which is the model Cursor is like, I think, getting merged, acquired by Space XAI. And they've co-developed a model called Grok 4.5. And it really is a good kind of like price performance. So you see like the score is getting very close to like the frontier models, but at a much cheaper cost. And I think what's good to highlight here, right, is you can see Opus right here. It's $3.91, basically the same performance as Grok. And so what you see here is like you get a huge price difference, even though you're getting very similar qualities. The other thing that's worth highlighting here is your effort level. So this is basically how hard an AI model is thinking makes a huge difference in the cost. So for example, like if you look at Fable, which is the most expensive model, you can spend $17 a task, or just as little as $4.50. So you see just like a 3x multiple by thinking harder. But what do you really get out of it, right? You sort of get like 9, 10% improvement, which is good, but like, maybe you don't need that, right? Especially if you have easier tasks. And that's the part where I want to highlight is on the very right side, you can see this model called GPT 5.6 Luna. So OpenAI released this, I think, about a month ago, but a couple of weeks ago, they actually had a huge price cut. They made it 5 times cheaper. And so you see just hugging on the right side, this is just kind of crazy to me. Is that like for like 8 cents a task? Again, this is like 100 times cheaper, compared to like Fable. You're getting like 50% performance. So I think where sort of like the meta is right now is, like not everything you're doing, like with vibe coding, like maybe you're just sort of like restyling some buttons, moving your layout around. You don't probably need Fable. That's going to be such an overkill. You're going to spend so much money. using something like Luna actually makes a lot of sense. You're going to save so much money. And I think this one tip alone can save you like 10x in vibe coding costs. Really, you just want to switch to the right model for the complexity of tasks. And now you might be thinking, well, it's like, I don't know how hard something is, right? Like, let's say I want to fix a bug. Like, is this an easy bug? Is this a hard bug? And, honestly, it's hard, right? Like, you can't really judge this ahead of time. This is why, in Dyad and I know a bunch of other tools are creating, it's like maybe what we can do is let AI decide what is hard and what is easy. And for the easier ones, give it to a cheaper model. So I would expect this is sort of the thing that you'll see kind of coming out is like, how can you get a better value? Use the right model. And increasingly, it'll be let the model pick the right model for you. And I think this is going to drive some really good savings for vibe coders.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting how powerful that, because if you look at this graph, it's so hard to know which one to use, especially if you're doing a bunch of tasks, like, you're gonna use so much of your own brain to decide which model to use,
Totally.
and you might not even be right. And even for me, and I guess for me and for AI models are gonna keep getting better at this because 'cause they're gonna understand benchmarks. But it is sometimes hard for me to even know, okay, do I use, 5.6 Sol? Do I use Grok 4.5? Do I
Yeah,
use
yeah.
Opus 5? And maybe the answer is you probably should go towards the less expensive one because if their performance is similar, then you just want to go towards the less expensive one. Um, but yeah, I agree. I think tools like Dyad and other tools are building out these routers as well. I think and it's nice to have a tool like Dyad as well, which is not inherently biased towards one model or the other. Like if you're using Cursor, they are going to be more biased towards Grok, I think, just because
Mhm,
it's owned by that. Um,
mhm.
but yeah, it's and then there's more models coming out every week, essentially
Yeah,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. If it's okay, maybe I'll show you just a couple more quick benchmarks. There's another benchmark here called DeepSWE. It's kind of similar to Cursor. And I think one thing they kind of mention, right, is like, sometimes you'll see benchmarks and like if someone made a benchmark and they look really good at it, like, is it sort of biased to it? And I think it's a fair question. So oftentimes what I like to do is just spot check, right? This is a very similar graph, right? Top right is better. And again, what you see is a Luna is just, fantastic. You get excellent cost for performance. And this is sort of what I do when I look at different models. Is like I'll look at a couple of these benchmarks, sort of approximate and see like, okay, this is a pretty good one. But again, as you're saying, like it's hard to know what exactly is the right model. So I think more and more tools like Dyad are going to be able to like help you pick the right model for your tasks, so you don't have to be the expert on the latest benchmarks.
Yeah. How do you think about, like, this idea that even though the token cost for an open weights model might be less,
Mhm.
like, OpenAI's models might be more expensive per token, but use less tokens and be more token efficient.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
is that taken into account with these benchmarks or not
Exactly,
necessarily?
exactly. Yeah, that's a super good point. So if you actually go to the details over here, you can see like the output tokens, the number of steps. So because
Mhm,
as you're saying, right, like if you have to spend a lot of tokens and it's more wasteful, and we see a little bit of this, right, in like the Kimi K3 models, is that even though it's cheaper than 5.6 Sol, like or like some of the other models, you'll see like it's actually not necessarily always the most affordable option for a given performance level.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and then is this most useful for people who are paying API cost, or like could it be useful if you have a subscription to OpenAI and you want to
Yeah.
supplement with API, or how should
Yeah, yeah,
someone
yeah.
think about that?
So the subscriptions are sort of like it's a little bit of a black box. Obviously, you get a good deal from like Claude and OpenAI. I think everybody sort of knows about this. But if you're using the cheaper models, right? For example, like if you use Luna, I think it's pretty clear like it's going to use less of your subscription usage. So
Mhm,
regardless of whether you're using API credits, subscription usage, I think understanding this is going to be helpful. Uh, But especially if you're paying API costs, right? Because then you're gonna feel every dollar. I think it makes a lot of sense. So this is where I think it's like it is definitely helpful to take a look at these
right.
charts.
Yeah, and maybe if you're on, like, the $200 subscription for OpenAI, you might have a hard time hitting limits even if you're using GPT 5.6 Sol, but if you're on the $20 a month plan, you can definitely hit limits, and that's where, like, it is, and that's where probably a lot of people are, and that's where it really comes into play of making sure you're using the right models.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Um, One final benchmark that's sort of interesting to look at is um, kind of different, where it's like it's not. judging things by yes or no. Instead, what it does is basically it does side by side comparisons. Essentially, it's say you want to build a CRM app, you give it a prompt, and it basically
Mhm.
has two models building it out. And you have this kind of like side by side comparison, and then you get ELO score. So, for example, like familiar chess, you sort of rank, which player, which model is stronger than the other one. And what you can see here is like when you look at the rankings of the models, right? You get Opus 5, not too surprising. But the next one is Kimi K3, Quen 3.8. And this is where you really see it's like that gap between the frontier and the closed source and open source models is getting really narrow here.
Mhm.
Because honestly, everything in this like top 5, 10, they're really good models, right? It's like you might not tell the difference on like 90% of the tasks, but there's a huge price difference. Like one model to really call out is DeepSeek V4 Flash, and the per token cost is just like really, incredible. It's 14 cents in, 28 cents out. And when you look
Mhm.
at, for example, Opus 5, that's almost 100x difference. So I think, this sort of shows you it's like the open weights are catching up, you're going to get a really good value. And having that ability to pick the model is going to make such a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah, and with Dyad, is it like, do you have a router there that is gonna helps people do that? Do you have to pick it yourself, or how does it work inside
Yeah.
Dyad?
So right now today, like you're gonna pick the model, and we'll have sort of defaults. Like the default model we use like 5.6 Sol. That's a good blend for like the
Mhm.
cheaper model. We'll have Luna. But what we want to do, we're actually working on this week, is sort of say like, okay, in the future, like don't think about this. We're going to just start being more intelligent and pick a cheaper model for the easier tasks. So that's definitely where we see the future heading towards.
So that was really helpful and definitely resonates with me. Again, like we said before, like the difference is really getting close between the frontier and the open weight models. And this would apply to, as you said before, any tool that you're using. And like I said in the beginning, later on, we're going to talk about when actually you wouldn't want to use Dyad, when other tools might actually be more useful, when you should use Dyad or a tool like Dyad. One thing I'm curious about, Will, since you're spending so much time in this space, where do you see this going? Like, do you think that the open weight models are going to catch up? Do you think that the frontiers are just going to keep using their lead to use those models to keep building better models? Obviously, no one knows this answer, but I'm just curious, like, since you're so in the space, what where your thoughts are on it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and like
If
my guess is as good as anyone else's
yeah,
guess. I see all the models sort of like getting better and better, right? Like we don't see any plateau, whether it's the open source, open weight models or the closed frontier models. But the thing is, I sort of see is like, for most people, right, when you're building an app, sort of like this like internal tool or like a CRM, some kind of SaaS app, you don't need Einstein level
hmm
intelligence, right? And that's where you see like these next models is like they're proving my math hypothesis I barely understand. They're doing all these crazy things. But for a good chunk of use cases, I think more and more you're going to see these models just being good enough, right? So maybe you don't need the number one model. Maybe the number three model, which is like 10 times cheaper, is really good for your use case. And I think what's going to be really exciting is like, a lot of people are predicting like, okay, in the next year or 2 years, eventually like the local models, right? The ones that you can run on your computer, your MacBooks, if they get good enough for these use cases, maybe like a vast majority of stuff, when you're coding, you can just use your local model. You get, better costs, you get privacy, all these aspects. And I think that's going to be a really interesting possibility. And like with Dyad, we're excited about that because, for a long time, it's like you can run Dyad on your computer, but to get, really good coding intelligence on a really beefy computer, you'd have to run your models on a cloud or somewhere. But I,
yeah.
I I think I think the day of the local models is coming. I don't know exactly when, but like, it could definitely happen in the next like 18, 24 months. I don't see like when you look at trend lines, right? It's like they're just getting so capable.
I would say like maybe a year ago, I was playing around with local models on my own computer, and I have a MacBook Pro. It's a relatively new one with
Yeah.
like 48 gigs of RAM, so it's like
Okay,
relatively
that's beefy. Yeah.
powerful. I got a pretty beefy one, and but even like a year ago, I was like, okay, it's really not working.
Yeah.
Have you played around with any that are like actually worth
Yeah.
trying, or it's still you think just like slows down the computer too much, or
Yeah. Yeah.
not working yet?
To be honest, I'm pretty similar to you. Where like 6, 12 months ago, I was trying out these models, and I only have a MacBook. I don't have a MacBook Pro, so like
So yeah.
there I was like pretty constrained. So I think a lot of this is sort of like look when I'm looking at the benchmarks, it's like the local models are like making the right progress, but like it's like the models that are really useful that I see people like making good usage out of is like sort of like the like 200 billion parameters. And most
Yeah.
people, like, when you're running it, like, locally, you can only fit, like, 30 billion parameters. So I think it's, like, it's probably still not there right now, but I think it's sort of
Yeah.
like it's all heading in the right direction, so
Especially when you can use like the new like DeepSeek Flash model for so cheap that even, you're not spending much, even if it's not on your computer.
oh,
But I do
totally.
think that that
Yeah.
is the future of where it's going. And I think Apple wants to build computers that are more and more capable of running
Yeah.
local models as well. So I agree with you. I think that's where
Yeah.
it's going. Okay. So that was one part of how to save money when you're vibe coding. One is definitely the AI model that you're using is super important. And I think that's super relevant now and changing like literally by the week with the new models coming and like this conversation would be totally different 6 months ago. But the next part is where to host. Because and that's something that actually resonates a lot with me. We were talking before we started recording about like Supabase, which I think is great. But they do charge $10 a month per project once you're off their like free plan, which I think gives you 2 or 3 projects. So like I think I have like 7 Supabase projects. I'm paying $10 a month right now. So yeah, I'm curious, what would you recommend people in terms of hosting? And that would apply to Dyad or any app that you build.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I sort of see, like, when you think about, like, cloud, where to host things, there's, like, kind of different layers, right? So, like, if you use sort of like your kind of like the really popular, like the Lovables, Replits, Base 44s. And again, I think they're really good tools. I think, for a lot of folks, especially if you're not technical at all, they're really easy to get started. They've got these integrated hosting platforms. And again, I think it's really easy to get started. But the one thing to watch out for is like when you look at like social media, some people's experience is that, it can get expensive pricey because essentially, like, like Lovables and Replits, like they're building on top of other cloud platforms. So like as you're mentioning, there's like Supabase, Neon. Sometimes these other companies are reselling on top of these other cloud platforms. They're going to take a margin. And if you end up deploying there, it can get really hard to move your data, right? It's like, well, then you have to take down your website. There's a maintenance window. You have to think about like, how do I do this safely, transition people. Once you have customers, this becomes a lot more difficult. So like generally what I recommend is like, hey, like once you built your app, it's awesome, it's working. Before you like, start mass publicizing, you launch from Product Hunt, just think, like, hey, like where am I deploying this? Is this going to like cost me a whole bunch of money or is this going to be something reasonable? And again, this is where like two really popular options for like your database is Supabase and Neon. They're both basically like Postgres database with a bunch of other functionality. But the big difference is Neon is serverless. And what that means is like, for example, like you're paying per project for Supabase because every project needs its own server. It's $10 a month, it adds up. Versus Neon, it scales really well. Like I think last time I checked, even on the free tier, you could get like 50 something projects, and then you get even more on the paid tier. So like you practically are not going to hit like your project limit. And for most people vibe coding, right? Like it's not like you're going to have like huge projects and a whole bunch of them. And something like Neon, the whole architecture makes it like really cost efficient. Maybe just like a quick plug for that. This is one reason is like we have like first class integrations for Supabase and Neon. Like, we see there's benefits to both. But I think, a lot of times people don't hear about Neon as much. It doesn't have like, it's not as out there, but it can actually be really good options for a bunch of people vibe coding, especially if you want to keep your budget reasonable.
What does it mean to be serverless? Like, what does that mean? Like as a developer, like, should you care or does it
Yeah,
not
yeah.
matter? Like, yeah.
Yeah, this is a great question. And like it's sort of like this like very buzzy marketing term, but the way I think about it is sort of like really about cost, right? So for example, like Supabase, if you're on the free tier, if you have a database, a project running, but you haven't used it, I think like, for like a few days or something, it'll basically go to sleep mode. It'll be paused, and nobody can access your website at that point. Then you can hit resume, and it basically spins up the server. And so that's sort of like a server full architecture, right? Sort of like a
Mhm.
traditional Postgres database. And what Neon did was sort of saying like, okay, instead of having a server for every database and projects, we're going to have a whole bunch of servers. You don't worry about it. We'll give you servers when you need it. When you don't need it, we're going to take it away. And that's really how they're able to, like, in their serverless architecture, give you a whole bunch of free projects. Because basically, like, your average free project is not going to do a lot of work, right? It's mostly just sitting there. And it's basically the cost for them is like almost like $0. And so I think that's where you really care about serverless or not, right? It's sort of like, hey, I only need traffic like, 4 hours a day, right? Do I have to pay for a server the other 20 hours a day? If serverless can help you save that money, then that's a really good option.
So is there what would be the reason to choose Supabase, I guess, a server full instead of
Sure.
serverless, I guess?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think if you end up getting into like a lot of traffic, right? Like there's actually like dedicated database providers like PlanetScale it just offers database. And you could actually get like, for example, if you're getting like a million requests a day, like it may actually make sense to have a serverful database over a serverless database. If you really care about your performance, like you want like instead of 200 milliseconds, you want 10 milliseconds for your database queries, then again, you might want serverful versus serverless. But for most people, right, like you're going to be totally fine on Neon. Like for example, Dyad, we actually like we have thousands of users we run on Neon. So like I think a lot of people are not gonna really hit the scale where like you have to start worrying about serverless. I think the main thing to think about is cost, right? Where it's like at some point it might be more expensive to run things in a serverless way than a serverful. But like when you're first getting started, you have a handful of users, serverless is gonna be end up becoming more inexpensive is more expensive.
Got it. So especially, if we're talking about how to save costs, if you want to spin up 10 project ideas and you build those out and you want to host them, Neon is going to be potentially could save you $100 a month because you don't have to pay Supabase I mean, maybe there'd be some you would have to get on you might be fine on the free tier actually of
Yeah,
Neon. So you
yeah.
might have to pay nothing
Yeah.
to host.
Yeah, yeah, totally. You might be finding on under free tier, and if you pay, it's still going to be like a fraction of what you'd pay normally. So yeah,
Got it. What about Netlify? Is that another option? I've I feel like I used them a while ago, but I
yeah,
haven't used them recently.
yeah. I'll be totally honest. I haven't used Netlify in a really long time, but I think
Okay.
there's sort of like kind of two ways to think about your cloud. Is like you've got your database, really the backend platform. So
Mm,
for example, like the Supabase and Neons we talked about, but then you have more of like the web hosting or the front end. So that's where I think like Netlify, Cloudflare, Vercel really fit in. And of
mm,
course, it's all kind of blurry, right? You kind of get a little bit of both on both sides. But like oftentimes though, you want to use one and the other as well, right? You have like a website, of course, like your myexample.com, you might host it on Vercel or Cloudflare, and then that's connected to your database, which again is connected to like Supabase or Neon.
right, right. Yeah, because I've built apps. It's like I have Neon for the backend database, and then I have Vercel for like to
Yeah,
get it onto the internet so I can
yeah,
publish it. Is that kind of
exactly,
the way
exactly.
to think about it,
Exactly,
essentially?
exactly. Yeah, and
Yeah.
exactly how we organize it, like, in Diet is, like, first of all, like, you just sync to GitHub, then you connect it for sale, deploy it, then you got your database, and we just go, like, 1, 2, 3, you just wanna think about the A
Right,
steps. And then
right.
this is where I think it's, like, using, like, Lovable Cloud, those things, you kinda simplify it to make it all into one thing. But once you get it started, right, like, it's really that initial setup that has some friction, but once you get it set up, it's actually gonna be really nice because not only can you save money, but, like, the other thing is, like, when something goes wrong, right, like, what you really want is, like, dashboard, you want logs. For example, like, you want to have a way to like have an MCP server to dig in, debug all these issues when you have a trouble at midnight. And that's what I also think about when you have a good cloud platform is like, will they give you all of that functionality that you're looking for? I think that's really important.
Got it, got it. And I guess transitioning a little bit to security, and I think this is another way that you can save money, or if something is not secure, like that could end up costing you money,
Yeah.
or in other ways. So how do you think about security with vibe coding, both like development and in production? I think this is an area that a lot of people, I think, especially when vibe coding first came out,
Yeah.
and everyone was like really concerned about
Yeah.
security. I think that the models have gotten better and the tools have maybe gotten better, but is it still a concern that people should be worried about?
Yeah. I think security is like a legitimate concern. Yeah. As you mentioned, like a year ago, it was sort of like all over kind of like tech media talking about like vibe coding security. I think it's serious, like, all the kind of like AI app builder platforms have some kind of security feature. Dad, we have the way of doing security review. But I think this is the dirty secret people don't talk about is that securities issues have been there forever. When I was at
Right.
Google, like we had security issues, right? Like, like every team you've got different, and these are like full-time, very experienced software engineers, but it's really easy to like introduce a security vulnerability. And I think this is where AI is super helpful because the models are getting really good at catching security issues, like much better than like if I stared at the code for 20 hours and it could just do it in 20 minutes. It's just going through every line. It's looking at all the important parts. So I think this is where like using the latest model actually really helps. So like, for example, like, earlier I was kind of mentioning using cheaper models, you can save money. I probably wouldn't skimp when it comes to security reviews because you don't have to do security review like for every single change, right? You don't have to like You don't need to use the latest and greatest model to change this box to be, like a nicer gradient. But, like before you publish, you want to make sure your access control is really tightly narrowed down. Then I think using models like GPT 5.6 Sol is really good, Opus 5. Now, the one kind of tricky part is people found out models are so good at security that the AI labs are also worried. It's like, well, what if you use it for like offensive purposes? You're like a cyber criminal. You're trying to attack, companies, and they have these different guardrails. And one model, for example, Fable 5 is like kind of like really well known for flagging things. So like even you ask like, how do I make this app more secure? Which is like a perfectly innocuous question. It might
Yeah.
say, hey, sorry, I can't help you with this. You're gonna have to use another model. So this is where like again, I recommend 5.6 Sol, Opus 5. They're really capable models and they won't refuse to help you secure your app because I think this is the part where it becomes a little bit cat and mouse where it's like, like getting the strongest model is gonna help you out. But, your goals really have just like a good baseline here. There's sort of these like standard best practices and whatever you're using is like, whether you're using Dyad or Codex, Claude Code, like you want to use something where it's like, hey, like before you push out your changes, like just do a security review. And it could be as simple as just telling your AI prompt, it's like, hey, review this app for any security issues. Like that's going to get you like 80% of the way there.
Yeah. 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 And I think that is also where the more powerful models make a big difference. For 6 months ago or longer, the model you could ask that question and it would be much more likely to miss something than today. What about testing? Like, is that also helpful for security or having the AI built? Like, I noticed that like GPT 5.6 like loves to build tests when I'm
Yeah,
building.
yeah.
Like, is that you think that's something that people should ask it to do,
Yeah,
or like
yeah.
how do you think about that with security? Or is that more of a like functionality thing than security?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's some overlap, but also some distinctiveness. Like you can definitely have tests to make sure things are secure. But generally, it's like when things are insecure, it's because like there was no test to begin with, right? It's sort of like you don't know what you don't know. That applies even to
Hmm.
AI models. On a separate note, we're actually thinking a lot about testing for Dyad, which is like one of like a year ago, for example, the models were pretty bad. Where like you would have a write test, and to fix a test, it would just cheat, right? Like actually, rather than fixing the code, it would just like change the test. It was just pointless, right? And I think the models are definitely getting better. It's doing less cheating. But the other problem is like you see a lot of tests where it's like it's testing like one specific piece, right? It's like, for example, like you have a meme, it's like, okay, you can open this like window this one way, but then when you actually want to open the door, like everything falls apart, right? And I think this is where like having integration tests, and when you think about it, is like as a user, like oftentimes what are you doing? You're creating count, you're clicking through things, you're making sure like the database is getting updated, like things are looking good. I think those tests are getting more and more valuable, and that's where we're sort of trying to gear towards Diet. We got a bunch of features we're working on where it's like we make it really easy. Where it's like normally when you're vibe coding, what you're doing is you're clicking through the UI and going like, okay, I do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it looks good. We're actually gonna have a way where you can like record all these steps, and then rather than you doing it every time manually, you have the AI just replay through it. So it's like, okay, I made a change, I'll replay through it. Does it look good? Does it not look good? So I think that's where I say like testing is good, but you really want good tests. And this is where it gets tough, right? Like when you're vibe coding, like you might not look at all the lines of codes to test. And if some of them are pretty garbage, it's like just kind of like wasting money. It's sort of like wasting tokens and not getting a ton of value. But the good test can really catch a bunch of bugs. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's really helpful. I wanted to get into also like when it makes sense to use Dyad versus when it makes sense to use other tools. And
Yeah.
for anyone watching, like I think this is how you know Will is honest because he's going to tell you when to not use his own tool and use someone else's tool. But yeah, I think it would be helpful to yeah maybe learn a little bit more about like what are the other value adds of Dyad. Like I know you can use any model. You just talked about some of the other value adds, but then also when it makes sense for different use cases.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and yeah, I'll be as honest as I can. I think diet is sort of where we see is like this really good middle option between, when you first get started vibe coding, a lot of times people use Lovable, but then what they want is to have more control, right? Like for example, like maybe they want to also use Claude Code and Codex for like the more complex backend logic, but Lovable is really easy to get started with. And I think with Diet is like you get a nice blend of both worlds where it's like, okay, you get the same vibe coding experience that you're used to with Lovable, right? You just type in a prompt, we'll get an app started, and really guide you through the process. So you don't need to know how to code. And I think it's good for that. But then we also give you the flexibility, right? Like we don't lock you into one kind of cloud platform. We let you go to Neon, Supabase, Vercel, but also you can really connect to wherever you want. You could just publish to GitHub. We have no incentive to try to shoehorn you to one way or the other. We let you pick any model. Again, we're not building any models. We're not training any models. We're not going to use your data to train a model. And this is where, again, we give that really the zero lock-in. And I think that's why people come to us, is that they want the flexibility. They want to really feel like they own their application. Now, the nice thing is, like, because all the code's on your computer, if you want to use Claude Code, it's right there. You don't have to like sync anything back and forth. It's your code is on your computer. And sometimes what we see is like, oh, like people really like using Dyad for the UI to front end. You have the preview right there. You can select components, really easy. But then for sort of the more gnarly backend stuff, hey, you got a Cloud Code subscription anyways. Why not use it? You can use it right there. You can even open up a terminal inside Dyad. You can use Cloud Code, Codex, whatever you want
Mm,
to. And so that's where sort of
cool.
where I see is like we're in the middle ground, right? Like if you're a professional software engineer, like certainly there's some people who use that in those cases, but you might want to use Codex, right? There might be some more powerful features. There might be some like really specific engineering workflows that Codex is going to be, more adept for you to. And on the other hand, like, if you're someone who's like, hey, like I've never seen a line of SQL, I don't even want to think about like where to host my database. I think using something like Lovable might actually be a lot easier to use because it's going to be all integrated into one. And if you're not worried about like all your costs, I think it's a perfectly good option as well. So that's sort of the way I think about it. Dyad isn't the perfect tool for everyone, and there's no one tool that's going to satisfy everyone. And I think what people really should want is, will you have the flexibility to switch tools, right? Like the worst thing that you want is you built an app on one tool and you have no way to get your code out. You have no way to like export it. Those are the things that like, those are the platforms I'd really steer away from. It's like when you get stuck and lock in. But fortunately, I
Yeah.
think more and more platforms are becoming more open. It's easier to kind of interop and switch. And I think ultimately that's good for the customers.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like if you're just like a total beginner and you could never imagine looking at any line of code ever, maybe you don't care about getting off of a platform. But I think for a lot of people, especially if you're watching this video, you probably care about not being locked in to your, whatever platform you're using. So that makes a lot of sense. So if people want to use Dyad, how can they try it out?
Yeah. Thanks, Seth. So if you want to check out Dyad, you can download for free. Go to Dyad, Dyad.sh. Download for free. And once you actually download it, open it up, there's a free pro trial. You can use it. It's totally free, and check it out and start building with Dyad. We have tons of people who built apps from start to finish without paying anything to Dyad. It's cool to see what they've built. And of course, if you want to support us, we've got Dyad Pro. It's got more features, functionality. You get access to all the top models. And yeah, every week we also ship new features based on community feedback. So if you want to just leave us any bug reports, feature requests on our GitHub repository, we're really active on there and we'd love to hear what people are building.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I think something that's cool about using Dyad is if you have questions or you see bugs, I'm sure it will actually take them seriously. It's not like some platforms you use where you're never going to be able to get in touch with anyone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's nice.
Yeah, totally, Seth. We're a really small team, just a few of us, and like I talked to a lot of customers. Like, you can actually sign up for office hours with me, and I'll be more than happy to chat with you about any feedback about your app. So yeah, we're a small company, and we're actually kind of happy about that, and we can really provide that personal support.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, definitely click the link in the description. Check out Dyad. It's actually really fun to build with. So I do recommend checking it out and trying it out. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get more free content like this. The AI world is changing so quickly, and I'm trying to do my best to bring on experts like Will to teach you and teach me. And I'm learning along with everyone watching. And things are changing so quickly. So subscribe to the YouTube channel to stay as up to date as you can. If you have any questions at all for me or for Will, leave them in the comments and we'll try to get back to you. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. And thanks, Will, for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here.